Thank you. And thank you to the organizers, the Policy Circle, for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity to share some thoughts on the subject. Already Ambassador Saran has set the context in terms of we are living in a geopolitical flux. The Indo-Pacific or the Asia-Pacific is going through a geopolitical flux. There are several powers, rising and middle powers in the Indo-Pacific region, but I think the China's rise has been the most impressive, the most dramatic, and of course the most consequential one in political, economic, military, and other terms in a sense. And China's military power, growing military power in particular, has had significant impact on the regional security dynamics. China's massive military power, accompanied by its aggressive actions against all of its neighbors, in a sense, have given way to growing insecurities across the region, in a sense. Even in the last 3 years, when much of the world has been dealing with the devastating consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic, something that China is a lot responsible for, even then, China did not spare anyone, whether it is, for instance, the naval intrusions in the Indo-Pacific, whether it is in the exclusive economic zone in Indonesia's backyard, or against Malaysia, Philippines, Vietnam, Taiwan, Japan, and of course India. So nobody has been spared of China's aggressive behavior, and this has in a sense led to a lot of the like-minded powers coming together with their own counter strategies and trying to work out ways and means to dealing with China's aggression in general terms. So there are multiple efforts at play in order to counter the Chinese aggressive behavior, and these have taken both military terms as well as in diplomatic terms. In the case of India, for instance, I think when you look at it, the Galwan conflict was a game changer moment for India, at least as far as India's China policy is concerned. Following the Galwan clash, there is seriously a rethinking in terms of how India needs to look at China, what are the kind of policy approach. There is some amount of, I would say, sort of elite perception that has changed, especially after the Galwan conflict in a sense. And it is a dangerous border. We still have an active conflict and continued deployment of about 60 to 80,000 troops on each side of the border. Those prolonged deployment of these large numbers of forces can have a lot of the sort of accidental conflict cannot be ruled out in a sense. So there are serious consequences both for India. Out of sheer fatigue in a sense, there could be accidents that can happen in a sense. I can get into greater detail, but I think we have General J.J. Singh also to kind of talk about a lot of those issues, being a ground practitioner in a sense. Third is, of course, the growing political and military competition. Again, another fallout of the growing Chinese military might. Countries in the region are building new strategic partnerships, new minilateral, so any number of trilateral partnerships, quadrilateral partnerships have emerged in the last few years, and India's own preference is now to work with a lot of the minilateral groupings because in some sense, failure may be too strong a word, but it's essentially a failure of the multilateral structures, multilateral negotiations, in a sense, has pushed India to adopt a much more pragmatic sort of a way ahead in making small progresses. So multilateralism has become one of the favorite kind of, at least it's part of the sort of an important aspect of India's foreign policy approach in managing China and ensuring that there is a stable Asian Indo-Pacific strategic order. And these partnerships have also kind of looked at, some of them could be, in a sense, looking at military partnerships, for instance, coming together for joint military exercises or security consultations, political dialogues, and so on and so forth. So the intensity as well as the frequency of these meetings gathering for any number of these kind of actions, whether it is dialogues, discussions, joint exercises, all of them have gone up precisely to look at how China is behaving and what can be done about it. We are not talking about China's containment of China. I think that's a ship that has sailed long time ago. As Ambassador Charan said, more than 80% of China's growth potential has already happened. So in a sense, containment is not what we are talking about. But how do we manage China's rise? How do we get China to play by the rules of the road and so on and so forth? And I think a lot of much of the onus is on China. So if China continues unabated with its belligerent mode, I think it will bring more and more countries in the into the Indo-Pacific fold, Indo-Pacific tent, and get a lot many more countries to endorse the Indo-Pacific strategic concept, as well as come up with ways and means to work with each other in a sense. There are other factors. There are also many larger number of military forces deployed across the region, again, in order to defend against and deter China. And some of these are also coordinated efforts, for instance, and these could potentially become military alliances in the future. Countries like India are not entirely comfortable with joint patrolling, for instance. We are comfortable with joint exercises, but we don't do joint patrolling at this point of time. But again, this is something that could change in the future, given how China's behavior continues to be the case in the future. Greater military spending, military modernization, especially naval modernization, I think that's something that we are witnessing in the region. Some of these are, of course, life cycle driven modernization, but I think there are also serious efforts underway to build up the military muscle in order to address China's aggressive military power. So even for a country that has a limited economic kitty, we are having to balance, we are having to allocate larger funds for its military modernization and able to sort of stand up a more capable military force. And we are facing not just one problem, one border, but we face on both our east and west. On the west, Pakistan is more of a nuisance, and that's a problem that we have come to live with for several decades now. But China, of course, is a much longer term, much more a strategic threat, I would say. So we have a serious issue to contend with and to deal with in that sense. And all of these issues are, in a sense, not leading to a very healthy security or political environment in the Indo-Pacific. There is greater suspicion, making it difficult to cooperate even on issues that might be mutually beneficial, for instance. Whether it is on environmental issues or disaster management and so on and so forth, cooperating with China has become that much more challenging, that much more difficult because of China's military might and, of course, the wolf warrior diplomacy that has been in play over the last few years, in a sense. So all of those issues have made it extremely challenging to work with China, even when there are issues that might actually work in our favor, work in a mutually beneficial win-win situation, in a sense. Again, none of these have been easy on the region or for India. This has not been an easy option. And so how does India look at all of these developments? What are India's goals? India, as a major Indo-Pacific power, has articulated its perceptions for the region and how it wants to shape the regional strategic dynamics. And more than one occasion, the current Foreign Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, has talked about that India does not want to see an Asia that is dominated by one single power. Essentially, he is referring to China because none of the other powers, none of the other rising powers have shown any inclination to dominate the region or has the capacity, the wherewithal to do that. And I think that's been very, very clear. It's a China-related problem. A related articulation is that India wants to see a multipolar world and a multipolar Asia. Again, this is it's a nice-sounding sort of concept in a sense. We want to say that we want a multipolar Asia, multipolar world, and so on and so forth. But in my own personal view, I'm not certain that it is going to lead to a sort of a stable, even Asian strategic order in a sense. But that's a point aside. Second major India's goal in that sense is that India has stated multiple times that it wants to see a rules-based order. Again, India has repeated this emphasis on respect for rule of law, respect for rules of the road, and again, evidenced by its own position on a number of different regional issues. For instance, India's position on the South China Sea, for instance, is unusually strong, I would say, considering that it is a dispute distant from its shores. But this also ties to India's own concerns about, and many of the other regional partners have similar issues about the possible increasing likelihood of American inattentiveness to in the face of growing China's power. And I think this is something that debate has happened even when the Trump administration was in office. Maybe not at this point of time, but a future U.S. administration and how they would look at this Indo-Pacific region, what kind of an accommodative kind of a fast posture they might adopt vis-a-vis China. Again, these are all, it's a gamble. So there are therefore efforts to kind of build up regional security partnerships. So even as the U.S. continues to be the most dominant power, and we need the U.S. power to be, it's a critical one. But nevertheless, even the U.S. allies and partners such as Japan, for instance, or Australia, they have been building up other Asian security partnerships as well. So Australia, Japan, India partnership, or any number of other minilaterals that have come about are also important in managing China in a sense. And I think these kind of minilaterals are going to be the flavor that's going to continue to be the case going future as well. Because I think, but there are some deficiencies in that kind of formulation. And one is, for instance, the lack of capacity, especially military capacity on the part of countries like India to carry out effective balancing against China. And therefore, the need to bring in as many countries as possible into these smaller coalitions, smaller minilaterals, with the goal of countering China. But again, I would say that these are possibilities we are looking at, because in case the US wants to dilute its presence, dilute its role in the Indo-Pacific, that's a contingency we are kind of looking at. But otherwise, if you look at even the major powers, India, Australia, Japan coming together, that is not still a match to contain China or to manage China, and therefore the US will continue to be continue to be an important power for the region, especially its military capabilities and so on and so forth. The second one, I'll stop with this, is the fact that issue is the absence absence of willingness to clearly identify the primary motivation for concepts like the strategic concepts like the Indo-Pacific, that is the China factor. And again, this is something that needs to be addressed. Even for India, a big power, and many other smaller countries have had difficulty in they have resisted in identifying China as the motivating factor for all of these groupings to come together and so on. Even for a big country, if we are hesitant to name China as a factor for many of our actions, and I don't expect the smaller countries to be that much more comfortable in but India kind of sometimes asks as to why they are not taking sides and so on and so forth. But I think it is a strategic flux, but I think the time for hedging our bets in terms of hedging is no more an effective strategy. We are unfortunately cornered in some sense to take sides, to choose our partners wisely. And just a point about the minilateralism, India is not new to minilateralism. India has done minilateralism even earlier. For instance, the BRICS, for instance, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa Cooperation, or the RIC, the Russia, India, China Collaboration, or the SCO, and so on and so forth. But the kind of minilaterals that India partnered in and engaged in the earlier years, and the kind of minilaterals that we have today, are qualitatively different. Here, there is earlier the minilaterals had a very broad-based goals in terms of a more representative multilateral world order, multilateral institutions, and so on and so forth, reforming the multilateral institution and things of that kind. But today's minilaterals are much more very straightforward in terms of managing China. Is at the root of the many of the minilaterals that we are engaging, and that's going to be an effective, possibly an effective strategy, even as we build up our military capabilities, because that's again another subject that we have to spend a lot of money, but it takes you back to how sound our economy is. Unless we are able to sustain a double-digit growth rate for a long period of time, our ability to spend on military capabilities, on diplomatic wherewithal, all of that is going to be fairly limited. Let me stop here and thank you for your attention.
Thank you.